They don't turn up to parliamentary hearings for Senate estimates. They hide from scrutiny. That's the key word for this government and for net zero. Hide. Hide the costs, hide the lack of a policy basis, hide the environmental damage, the economic damage, the social damage, hide the lack of a plan, taking us blindfolded over a cliff. Culture of hiding behind secrecy, spin and broken promises. The Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, operates our entire electricity grid. It sounds like a government agency, yet somehow it's a private body. No one's allowed to lodge a Freedom of Information request with them.
All right, imagine the lights flicker, the kettle pauses mid-boil, and somewhere in Canberra, a very serious folder marked Net Zero, totally sorted, slides quietly under a desk. That's the vibe we're walking into today, because this isn't a thriller, it's not a sci-fi, and it's definitely not a horror movie. Although some electricity bills might argue otherwise. This is a political pantomime, and front and centre we've got Senator Malcolm Roberts standing up in the Senate chamber like the kid in class who actually read the assignment, while the rest of the room suddenly finds the ceiling extremely interesting. And hovering over it all like a faint echo on a Zoom call is the idea of net zero, smiling politely, nodding confidently and refusing to answer any direct questions. Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favour, hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you. Culture of hiding behind secrecy, spin and broken promises. The Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, operates our entire electricity grid. It sounds like a government agency, yet somehow it's a private body. No one's allowed to lodge a Freedom of Information request with them. They don't turn up to parliamentary hearings for Senate estimates. They hide from scrutiny. That's the key word for this government and for net zero. Hide. Hide the costs, hide the lack of a policy basis, hide the environmental damage, the economic damage, the social damage, hide the lack of a plan, taking us blindfolded over a cliff. Where did it start? It started in the years from 1996 to 2007 under the LNP John Howard's Prime Ministership. He started this insanity, based, they assured us, on the science. Yet 6 years after getting the boot in faraway London, John Howard confessed that, quote, "On the topic of climate science, I'm agnostic." He didn't have the science. The whole parliament hijacked for the last 30 years, 3 decades.
Thank you, Senator.
Roberts kicks things off by talking about a culture of hiding, and you can almost hear the word echo around the chamber, hiding behind secrecy, behind spin, behind promises that were shiny when they were new, but now rattle when you shake them. And then comes AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, which sounds like something you'd expect to have a government crest, a counter, and maybe a helpful pamphlet. But no, it's a private body running the entire electricity grid, which is a bit like finding out the referee owns the stadium, the ball and the rulebook, and also won't take questions after the match. You can almost picture Roberts leaning into the microphone, eyebrow raised, politely asking, "So who watches the watchers?" And the answer floats back like a boomerang that never quite returns. You can't FOI them. They don't front up to Senate estimates, and scrutiny bounces off like rain on a freshly waxed ute. If hiding were an Olympic sport, this would be gold medal territory, and the podium would be carefully obscured behind a privacy screen. And that's where the parody really starts to sing, because every time Roberts says hide, it's like a bingo card lighting up. Hide the costs, hide the lack of policy detail, hide the environmental trade-offs, hide the economic impacts, hide the social consequences, hide the plan. Because apparently the plan is a bit like Bigfoot. Everyone talks about it, there are blurry sightings, but no one's ever actually seen it up close. The nation, meanwhile, is being marched forward, blindfolded, trusting the vibes, hoping there's solid ground ahead and not a steep drop with a polite sign saying transition. Now enter Penny Wong, not physically storming the stage, but very much present in spirit, armed with that calm, composed energy that says, everything is under control, even when the questions are stacking up like unpaid parking fines. In this parody world, Penny isn't the villain twirling a moustache. She's the unflappable school principal, assuring parents that the excursion is perfectly safe, even as the bus is still being planned. Every question is met with confidence, careful phrasing, and an impressive ability to talk for a full minute without landing anywhere specific. And somewhere far away from the upper house, because this is the Senate after all, Anthony Albanese exists like a guest star who couldn't make it to filming that day. He's technically part of the story, just not in the room, which gives the whole thing a slightly sitcom feel. You can imagine a cardboard cutout of the Prime Minister propped against the wall, smiling reassuringly while the adults argue about who's got the map. Roberts then rewinds the tape because every good parody needs a flashback. He takes us back to the late 90s and early 2000s when the seeds of all this were planted. Governments changed, slogans evolved, but the assumptions stayed the same. Don't worry, the science has got this. Fast forward a few years, and suddenly a former Prime Minister casually admits he was agnostic on the science all along. It lands not like a scandal, but like a quiet plot twist, the kind that makes you sit up and say, hang on, what? And that's where the satire bites gently but firmly. Because for 30 years, according to Roberts, the entire Parliament has been riding this issue like a dodgy second-hand bike, assuring the public the brakes work, even as everyone hears a suspicious squeal. Different parties took turns at the handlebars, each promising smoother roads ahead, while quietly hoping the wobble wasn't too obvious. In this parody universe, net zero becomes less of a destination and more of a motivational poster. It looks great on the wall, sounds inspiring in speeches, and makes everyone feel progressive and forward-thinking. The problem is when someone like Roberts asks, OK, but how exactly do we get there? How much does it cost? And who's paying? The room suddenly needs a coffee break. Penny Wong, ever composed, reassures everyone that the journey is underway. The experts are consulted and the details will unfold in due course, which is political language for trust us. And that's the heart of the comedy. Not mockery of people, but of the process. The idea that something as fundamental as electricity, the thing that keeps hospitals running and fridges cold, is wrapped in language so abstract it could double as modern art. Roberts plays the straight man asking stubbornly practical questions, while the system answers with philosophical reflections and glossy assurances. By the time he wraps up, thanking the chamber with a tone that's polite but pointed, the audience is left with that uniquely Australian mix of humour and scepticism. No screaming, no insults, just a raised eyebrow and a dry observation that maybe, just maybe, we deserve a bit more transparency before we all march confidently into the future. And that's why this moment works as parody. Not because it tears people down, but because it highlights the absurdity of complexity without clarity. Penny Wong remains calm, Albanese remains offstage, AEMO remains elusive, and Malcolm Roberts remains that bloke at the barbecue who keeps asking questions until someone finally admits they don't actually know where the sausages came from. The lights flicker back on, the kettle finishes boiling, and Australia carries on, laughing just enough to stay sane while hoping the answers eventually stop hiding